"You don't belong at this table, Emily. Leave before you embarrass us again." It was said into a crystal microphone, loud enough to carry across the entire ballroom at the Westbrook Grand Hotel. 42 guests turned at once. Forks paused mid-air. Someone near the back laughed under their breath. No one stopped him. I set my napkin down beside the untouched salmon. "My name is Emily Carter." I was 29 years old that night, and everything he said was wrong. They just didn't know it yet. The Carter house sat on a corner lot in Brookline, Massachusetts, 3 blocks from a private golf club my father never stopped mentioning. White siding, black shutters, a maple tree the front yard that dropped leaves in exact inconvenient piles every October. The kind of house people slowed down to look at, even though there was nothing unusual about it. Inside, everything had a place. My mother made sure of that. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. There was a narrow console table with a silver tray for keys, aligned, always aligned, and a framed photo of my parents from their 20th anniversary. My mother wore a navy dress. My father stood slightly in front of her, one hand resting on the back of her chair like he owned the moment. He usually did. My father, Richard Carter, believed in order, not just in the house, in people, in outcomes, in the way a family should be structured, spoken to, and, most importantly, seen. There were rules. They weren't written down, but you learned them early. Who spoke first at dinner? Who got interrupted? Who got listened to? My older brother Daniel was at the top. 32, clean-cut, finance degree from NYU. He worked at a mid-sized investment firm in Boston and said words like portfolio and risk exposure in casual conversation. My father listened when Daniel spoke. Not always with agreement, but always with attention. Daniel sat to my father's right at dinner. My younger sister Chloe came next. 26, marketing coordinator at a boutique agency. She had my mother's smile and knew exactly when to use it. Chloe didn't challenge anything. She adjusted. Smoothed things over. Filled silence before it became uncomfortable. She sat to my mother's left. I sat across from no one in particular. It wasn't assigned. It just ended up that way. There's a difference between being ignored and being accounted for but dismissed. In our house, I was the second. My mother, Linda Carter, managed the space between us all. She noticed everything: the way a glass was set down too hard, the way a sentence lingered too long. She corrected quietly, but consistently. "Emily, don't speak over your father. Emily, that's not how we present things. Emily, you're being difficult again." Always said with a soft smile, always in front of other people. The first time I noticed the hierarchy clearly, I was 12. We were at the kitchen table. It was a Sunday. My father had the newspaper folded in half, reading the business section. Daniel was explaining something about the stock market. He'd just started high school and had discovered an interest in numbers that made my father visibly proud. I had a science project due the next day. A model bridge made from wooden sticks and glue. I had tested it the night before. It held 12 pounds before collapsing. "I think it's going to win," I said, placing it carefully on the table. No one looked up. Daniel kept talking. My father nodded. I waited 3 seconds. Then 5. "It held 12 pounds, I added. My father turned the page of the newspaper. Chloe asked for more orange juice. That was the first time I understood something without anyone explaining it. Information from me required validation. From someone else, it was accepted as fact. It stayed that way. When I was 16, I got a part-time job at a bookstore on Beacon Street, minimum wage, 10 hours a week. I liked the quiet, the way people spoke in lower tones around shelves. One night at dinner, I mentioned I'd been offered more hours. "That's good," my mother said. "Keeps you busy." Daniel didn't look up from his phone. My father cut his steak into precise squares. "Just don't let it distract you from something that actually matters." He didn't ask what I wanted it for. The next week, Daniel told them he was considering an internship. Unpaid. At a firm his friend's father owned. My father leaned forward. "That's exactly the kind of exposure you need. Same table, same chairs, different weight, By the time I graduated college, University of Massachusetts Business Administration honors, I had stopped announcing things at dinner. I still achieved them. I just didn't place them on the table anymore. Instead, I built quietly. I took a job at a regional logistics company in Cambridge, entry-level operations coordinator, $48,000 a year. I tracked shipments, resolved delays, handled vendor disputes no one else wanted. It wasn't impressive on paper. It wasn't meant to be. Within 18 months, I was managing 3 accounts worth a combined $2.3 million annually. I knew the exact routes, the weak points in the system, the drivers who cut corners, and the ones who didn't. I knew which warehouses delayed paperwork and which ones lost inventory. No one at home asked. When I got promoted to operations manager, $76,500 salary, full benefits, I told him at dinner because it felt like something I should say out loud at least once. "That's nice," Chloe said, smiling. "Stability is important." Daniel nodded once. "Operations is steady." My father took a sip of water. "As long as you're comfortable." Comfortable, the word sat there longer than anything else. I didn't correct him. By the time of their 35th anniversary dinner, the roles were fixed. Daniel handled anything financial. Chloe handled appearances. My mother curated the narrative. My father delivered the lines, and I attended. The event itself had been planned for months. A private ballroom at the Westbrook Grand Hotel, 42 guests, a live string quartet near the far wall, white tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, folded place cards with each guest's name written in my mother's careful script. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wore a black dress I had bought myself 3 weeks before. Simple, structured. It fit without adjustment. No one commented on it. Daniel was already there, standing near the bar with 2 of my father's colleagues, talking about market trends. Chloe moved between tables, adjusting centerpieces that didn't need adjusting. My mother stood near the entrance, greeting guests with both hands, and a practiced warmth that looked effortless from a distance. My father stood at the center of it all. When I approached, he glanced at me once, then past me, already looking for the next person worth acknowledging. "Emily," he said, like checking a box. No smile, no follow-up, just confirmation. I took my seat. It was at the far end of the table, not assigned, officially. But the place card had my name on it, written in the same careful script as the others, aligned, exactly where it was meant to be. By the time the first course was served, the room had settled into its rhythm. Glassware clinked softly. Conversations overlapped in low, controlled tones. The quartet played something classical I didn't recognize. At 8:17 p.m., my father stood up to speak. At 8:19, he picked up the microphone. At 8:20, he looked directly at me. And at 8:21, he said the line that made the entire room turn. Everything that came after started there. The first time it happened that night. It was small enough that no one else would have marked it as anything. The salad course had just been cleared. The scent of balsamic vinegar still hung faintly in the air, mixing with the polished wood and something floral from the centerpieces, white lilies arranged too tightly in low glass bowls. The string quartet had shifted to something slower. Conversations softened. I leaned slightly toward Chloe. "The event planner did a good job," I said. "The timing between courses is tight." She didn't look at me. She adjusted the stem of her wineglass instead. Daniel answered in her place. "They had a team of 6, he said, still facing the table, not me. It's not complicated when you throw enough money at it." "I wasn't asking about the cost," I said. He smiled, but not at me. "You don't usually." The couple across from us let out a quiet laugh. Polite, controlled, the kind that acknowledges something without fully committing to it. I picked up my water glass. It was cold. Condensation gathered at the base, leaving a faint ring on the tablecloth. I didn't respond. The second time was sharper. Dinner plates arrived. Filet mignon, medium rare, with roasted potatoes arranged in a precise line and a single asparagus spear placed diagonally across the plate. My mother had approved the menu 2 weeks earlier. I knew because she had mentioned it 3 times. Halfway through the course, one of my father's colleagues, Mark Jensen, I think, asked a general question into the table. So, Emily, what did you do again? It was the kind of question people ask when they've heard your name but not your story. I manage operations for a logistics firm in Cambridge, I said. Mostly regional distribution. 3 primary accounts. He nodded once. Busy then. Consistent, I said. Before he could ask anything else, my father set his fork down. Emily handles coordination, he said, cutting the word cleanly. It's administrative. Keeps things moving. The word landed heavier than the plate administrative. Mark nodded again, this time shorter. Got it. The conversation moved on. No one asked what the accounts were worth. No one asked how many people reported to me. I cut my steak into smaller pieces than necessary. I didn't correct him. The third time, Chloe made it softer, which made it worse. Dessert menus had just been placed on the table. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, chocolate torte, lemon tart, vanilla bean creme brulee. The air had shifted slightly warmer as more people spoke at once. Chloe leaned toward one of her friends, a woman in a pale blue dress with a thin silver bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her wrist. Emily's always been more independent, Chloe said, her voice low but not low enough. She likes doing her own thing, less pressure that way. The friend smiled politely. That sounds nice. Chloe nodded. Yeah, not everyone thrives in high-stakes environments. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. I placed the dessert menu back on the table, the edge aligned with the fork. I said nothing. The fourth time came from my mother. It was near the end of the meal. Coffee had been served, dark roast, slightly bitter, the kind that leaves a dry finish at the back of your tongue. The room had grown louder. People were more relaxed now. Chairs shifted. Laughter came easier. My mother stood beside me, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. Emily, she said softly, but with the tone she used when something needed to be corrected. When your father speaks in a few minutes, just stay seated. Let Daniel handle the introductions after. I wasn't planning to stand, I said. She smiled, but her eyes held for half a second longer than necessary. Good, she said. It's just not your role tonight. Not your role. The phrase settled into place beside the others. I took a sip of coffee. It had cooled enough to drink without flinching. I didn't respond. The fifth time was the one that crossed the line. It came just before the speech. My father had already stood once to thank everyone for coming. Glasses had been raised. A few light toasts had followed. Daniel spoke briefly. Chloe added something about family legacy, and my mother closed with a short, practiced expression of gratitude. Then there was a pause, a natural one, the kind that exists between formalities and whatever comes next. I stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to reach into my bag, which rested against the leg of my chair. Inside was a small envelope, ivory, unmarked. It contained something simple, a handwritten letter I had spent 3 nights drafting. It wasn't long, just precise. I had planned to give it to them privately. Before I could sit back down, my father's voice cut across the table. Emily. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. 42 people turned again. I remained standing. What are you doing? He asked. This isn't the time, he said. Sharper now. Sit down. The room went still in that particular way that only happens when people are pretending not to watch. I wasn't going to speak, I said. Then sit, he said, 3 letters. No room around them. I looked at the envelope in my hand. The paper had a slight texture. I could feel the edge of the folded letter inside. I placed it back in my bag, and I sat. That could have been the end of it. It should have been, but at 8:21 p.m., my father picked up the microphone again, and this time, he didn't lower his voice. You don't belong at this table, Emily. Leave before you embarrass us again. The word again hung there, unsupported. No one had seen me embarrass anyone. No one asked what he meant. A fork tapped lightly against a plate somewhere to my left. Someone shifted in their chair. The quartet stopped playing without being told. 42 people. No one interrupted him. I looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then I stood up. I picked up my bag. The strap slid over my shoulder without resistance. No one reached for me. No one said my name. I walked the length of the table. 12 steps. I counted them without meaning to. At the door, I paused just long enough to hear my mother say softly, "Let her go." The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet. Carpeted, beige walls. A single painting of a harbor scene hung slightly off-center. I checked my phone. 8:24 p.m., 3 minutes after the line. I didn't go back in. I didn't call anyone. I stepped outside the hotel. The air was colder than it had been earlier. There was a faint smell of rain, though the sky was clear. I stood there for a moment. Then I made a decision, not quickly. Not emotionally, just clearly. I opened my bag, took out the envelope, looked at it once, then I reached for my phone, and I dialed the one person my family had spent years pretending didn't matter. He answered on the second ring. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. "I'm ready," I said. There was a pause then. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Shorter. "Then we do it tonight," he said. I ended the call at 8:27 p.m. 3 minutes later, I was in my car, and by 9:21 p.m., they were no longer the ones in control. I sat in the car with the engine off. The dashboard clock read 8:31 p.m. The parking lot outside the Westbrook Grand was half full. Black sedans, 2 SUVs, a valet stand under a brass lamp. Someone laughed near the entrance, the sound carrying briefly before the door closed again. I placed both hands on the steering wheel still. No shaking, no second guessing. Inside the ballroom, the program would continue. My father would recover. He always did. A joke, maybe. A redirection. Daniel would step in if needed. Chloe would smooth the edges. My mother would recalibrate the room. They had a system. I had just stepped outside of it. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope again. Ivory, slightly textured. My handwriting across the front. Nothing ornate, just their names. I turned it over once. Then I set it on the passenger seat. It wasn't needed anymore. I picked up my phone. There were no messages. No missed calls. No one checking where I was. That part settled something. I opened my contacts and selected his name again. I didn't hesitate this time. He answered immediately. "I'm 10 minutes away," he said. "I'll be here," I replied. A pause. "You understand what happens after this?" He said, "Yes, it won't stay contained." "I know." Another pause. Short, measured. "Good," he said. "Then don't go back inside." "I'm not." I ended the call. The air inside the car had cooled. I turned the key halfway, just enough to start the ventilation. A low hum filled the silence, predictable. Controlled. I adjusted the rearview mirror. Though there was nothing behind me I needed to see, for a moment I let the timeline settle. 21 p.m., the line 8:24 p.m. I walked out 8:27 p.m., the call 8:31 p.m., the decision fully in place. No gaps, no confusion. Just sequence. I thought about going back in. Not to argue, not to respond, just to hand them the envelope. Let them read it later, let it sit with everything else unsaid. I looked at the hotel entrance. 2 people walked in together, dressed for the same event. The woman adjusted her coat. The man checked his watch. The door opened. Light spilled out. Then it closed again. I didn't move. Instead, I reached into the glove compartment and took out a thin folder. Manila. Edges slightly worn from being handled more than once. I placed it on my lap. Inside were copies. Not originals. Originals were somewhere else, where they needed to be. I flipped it open. First page. A printed email thread. Dates aligned along the right margin. Subject line repeated across 3 pages. Second, a contract, signature at the bottom. Not mine. Third, a transfer record. Amount listed in exact figures, 187,000. No rounding, no ambiguity. I closed the folder, set it back in the glove compartment, and shut it. At 8:39 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the lot and parked 2 rows over. He stepped out alone, same as always. No rush, no unnecessary movement. He closed the door, adjusted his jacket once, and looked directly toward my car. I stepped out before he reached me. We didn't shake hands. We didn't exchange anything performative. You have everything? He asked. Yes. Copies? Yes. He nodded. Once. Then we proceed. I glanced once more at the hotel entrance. No one had come out. No one was looking for me. That was the last confirmation I needed. I won't be going back in, I said. You don't need to, he replied. We stood there for one more second, no longer. Then he turned toward the entrance. I followed, but not beside him, half a step behind, not hidden, just separate. At the door, he paused briefly, then pulled it open. The sound from inside returned immediately. Voices, cutlery, the low hum of a room that believed it was still in control. He stepped in first. I entered 3 seconds later. No one noticed at first. That was fine. They were about to. The ballroom doors closed behind us with a soft, padded thud. Inside, nothing had changed on the surface. The quartet had resumed. A slower pace this time. Conversations had picked back up, slightly louder than before, as if people were compensating for the interruption. Plates had been cleared. Coffee cups remained. My father stood near the center table, one hand resting on the back of his chair, speaking to a small circle of guests as if the last 15 minutes had not happened. He was good at that, containing a moment, rewriting it in real time. The man beside me didn't look at any of them. Stay here, he said quietly. I did. He walked forward alone, not quickly, not slowly, just directly. At 8:44 p.m. he reached the edge of the main table. At 8:45 he spoke. Richard Carter? My father turned. It took less than a second for recognition to register. Not familiarity, something else. A calculation. A brief, precise shift in posture. Yes, my father said. The room didn't go silent immediately this time. It took a few seconds. Conversations tapered. A few people leaned back slightly in their chairs. Someone near the far table lowered their glass without drinking. The man reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed a folded document. My name is Jonathan Reeves, he said. I'm an attorney representing Ms. Emily Carter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words carried cleanly. My father's expression didn't change, but his hand left the back of the chair. I think this is neither the time nor the place, he said. Jonathan unfolded the document. I disagree. A single page, crisp, white, typed. There are financial matters and contractual misrepresentations that require immediate attention, Jonathan continued. Given the nature of the evidence, I've also advised my client to file a formal report. A pause, not for effect, for accuracy. With the police. The words settled differently than anything else that had been said that night. Across the room, someone shifted hard enough that their chair legs scraped against the floor. My father glanced once, just once, past Jonathan, toward me. I didn't move. Jonathan continued. On March 14th of this year, a transfer in the amount of $187,000 was executed from a subsidiary account connected to Carter Industrial Supply. He turned the page slightly, enough to reference the line. The authorization attached to that transfer includes a signature attributed to Emily Carter. 42 people, no one spoke. The signature is not hers, he said. My father's jaw tightened once. Brief. Controlled. That's a serious accusation, he replied. It's a documented one, Jonathan said. He placed the paper on the table, not slid, placed. There are 3 additional documents, he continued, including an email chain dated February 28th through March 10th, in which internal approvals were discussed without Ms. Carter's knowledge. My mother took a step forward. Emily doesn't work for the company, she said, her voice softer but edged. There must be some confusion. There isn't, Jonathan replied. He reached into his folder and removed 2 more sheets, set them beside the first. The accounts in question were structured in a way that routed liability through a secondary name, he said. Your daughters. Chloe's hand moved to her mouth, not fully, just enough to touch the edge of her lip. Daniel spoke for the first time. That's not possible, he said. She's never had access to. I didn't need access. I said. My voice didn't rise, it didn't carry across the room the way theirs had. But it reached the table. Daniel turned, so did everyone else within range. I didn't sign anything, I added. Jonathan nodded once, without looking at me. The forensic review confirms that, he said. The signature was replicated. Poorly. A small sound moved through the room, not a word, not quite a gasp, something in between. My father didn't look at the documents. He looked at Jonathan. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked. Jonathan held his gaze. That this was intentional, he said, and that it constitutes fraud. The word stayed in the air longer than it should have. At 8:52 p.m., the ballroom doors opened again. This time, no one missed it. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, Boston Police, dark blue, badges visible. One of them held a small notepad. The other scanned the room once, quickly, then focused on Jonathan. He gave a slight nod. They approached the table. My mother stepped back. Daniel straightened. His shoulders pulled tight, as if posture alone could correct what was happening. Chloe didn't move at all. My father remained where he was, still controlled, but his hand, resting now on the edge of the table, pressed down harder than before. One of the officers spoke. "Mr. Richard Carter?" A beat. "Yes," my father said. "We've received a report regarding a financial transaction tied to your business," the officer said. "We're going to need to ask you a few questions." No one interrupted this time. No one laughed. No one looked away. Jonathan stepped back half a pace. He didn't need to say anything else. The documents were on the table. The numbers were exact. The names were clear. I walked forward then, not quickly. 12 steps again. I stopped at the same place I had stood earlier. Same distance, same angle. My father looked at me. Not past me, at me. For the first time that night, he didn't speak immediately. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope. Ivory. Unmarked. I placed it on the table beside the documents. "You said I didn't belong at the table," I said. My voice stayed level. "You were right." A pause. Then one more sentence. "But neither does this." No one touched the envelope. It sat beside the documents, its edges perfectly aligned with the grain of the table, as if it had always been part of the arrangement. The officers didn't look at it. Jonathan didn't gesture toward it. It wasn't evidence, it was context. "Mr. Carter," the first officer said, "we're going to need you to step aside with us." My father didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed on me for 1 second longer than necessary. Not anger, not confusion, calculation, again, looking for a way to reposition the moment. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding," he said, turning slightly toward the officers but not fully away from the table. "This is a private family matter. It involves a financial report and a signed authorization." The second officer replied. "We'll sort out what's private once we have the facts." The room had gone completely still now. 42 people, seated in careful rows, watching something they hadn't been invited to witness. Daniel stepped forward. "There's no need for this to happen here," he said, his voice tighter than before. "We can schedule." "This is where the report was delivered," Jonathan said, cutting in without raising his tone. "And this is where the individuals involved are present." Daniel stopped. He looked at my father. For instruction, there wasn't any. My mother moved next. "Emily," she said, her voice low, controlled, the same tone she used when correcting something small at dinner. "This isn't necessary. Whatever you think happened, we can discuss it privately." I didn't look at her. "The transfer cleared on March 14th, I said, at 2:16 p.m. The officer with the notepad glanced down, wrote it. My mutterns tightened slightly around the back of the chair she was holding. "There are 3 emails confirming internal approval," I continued. "None of them include me." Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't need to. My father exhaled once, measured, then he stepped away from the table, not quickly, not reluctantly, just, precisely. "I'll answer your questions," he said to the officers. They guided him a few steps to the side of the room, near the far wall where the quartet had stopped playing again. The musicians sat still, instruments lowered. bows resting lightly across strings that no longer moved. Daniel followed 2 steps behind, then stopped when one of the officers raised a hand. "Just him for now." Daniel nodded once, stepped back. Chloe still hadn't moved. Her eyes were fixed on the documents, not reading them, just fixed. My mother remained where she was, her posture unchanged, but something in her face had shifted, not outwardly, subtle. The way a smile disappears from the corners first. Jonathan gathered the remaining copies from his folder and set them down beside the originals. "There will be a formal request for records," he said. "Not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for the table. Bank statements, internal communications, authorization logs." No one responded. At 9:03 p.m., one of the officers asked my father a question I couldn't hear. My father answered, short controlled. The second officer wrote something down. At 9:05, the first officer asked another. This time, my father didn't respond immediately. His hand moved once, subtle, toward his jacket. Then stopped. He adjusted the cuff instead. A small correction. The officer repeated the question. My father answered again, this time longer. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Once. Then back. Chloe lowered her hand from her mouth. My mother finally stepped away from the chair. She walked toward me, not quickly, not slowly, each step measured. She stopped at arm's length. "Emily," she said, "just my name." No correction, no instruction. I looked at her then. Up close, I could see the details that didn't show from across the table. The slight crease between her eyebrows. The way her lipstick had faded unevenly at the center. The tension in her jaw she usually masked with posture. "This doesn't have to continue," she said. "You've made your point." I shook my head once. "I didn't come to make a point," I said, a pause. "I came because you used my name." She held my gaze, for a second, maybe two. Then she looked down, not at me, at the envelope. It was still untouched. "Is that?" she started. "Yes," I said. She didn't finish the question. Behind her, one of the officers stepped back from my father. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we're going to need you to come with us to review this further. Not an arrest. Not yet." But close enough that the room understood. My father nodded once. He reached for his jacket, this time without stopping, and put it on fully. Adjusted the front, straightened the collar. Then he turned. Not to the officers, to the table, to the room, to the people who had watched him speak for years without interruption. His eyes moved once across the space, then stopped, on me, for half a second, that was all. Then he looked over. The officers guided him toward the exit. No one stood. No one spoke. The doors opened, closed. And just like that, the center of the room was empty. The absence was louder than anything that had been said. Daniel moved first. "Emily," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier certainty. "You didn't have to do this here." I looked at him. "Yes," I said. One word. Nothing around it. He didn't respond. Chloe finally blinked, like she had come back into the room from somewhere else. My mother picked up the envelope. Her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second at the seal. Then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten. 2 paragraphs, no corrections, no crossouts. She read it once, then again. Her posture changed in a way that was almost imperceptible. Her shoulders lowered by less than an inch, her grip on the paper loosening just enough that it shifted slightly in her hand. She didn't read it out loud. She didn't need to. Whatever was written there, it was no longer for the room. It was for her. Jonathan closed his folder. "There will be follow-up," he said quietly. "We'll be in contact." He turned to me. A single nod, nothing more. Then he walked out. No one stopped him. I remained where I was, same place, same distance, 42 guests. No one laughing now, no one whispering, just watching. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, smoothed the front of my dress once, and then I spoke, not to my father, not to my mother, to the room. "You heard him earlier," I said. "He said I didn't belong at this table." A pause. "I agree." I let the silence hold for exactly 1 second, then finished. "I just didn't realize he meant it literally." By 9:18 p.m., the room had started to move again. Not naturally, not the way it had before. Conversations returned in fragments, lowered, uneven. Chairs shifted without purpose. Glasses were lifted and set back down without being emptied. The quartet remained seated, instruments still resting in their laps, waiting for a signal that never came. Half the guests avoided looking at me. The other half didn't. Daniel was the first to leave the table. He walked toward the exit my father had taken, stopped halfway, then turned back as if he had forgotten something. He hadn't. There was nothing for him to retrieve. He just needed movement. "Emily," he said again. Quieter this time, standing 2 steps away from me. "If this escalates—" "It already has," I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked past me, toward the doors. "You should have come to me first," he said. I didn't respond. There wasn't a version of that conversation that would have changed anything. He nodded once, more to himself than to me, then walked out without another word. Chloe stayed at the table. She sat down slowly, as if the chair might not be there when she reached for it. Her hands rested flat on the tablecloth, fingers spread slightly, like she needed to feel something stable. "I didn't know," she said. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. I believed her. "That doesn't change what happened," I replied. She nodded once. A small, mechanical movement. "I know," she said. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just sat there, looking at the documents as if reading them would change the numbers. My mother folded the letter carefully along its original crease, once. Then again, aligning the edges precisely before placing it back into the envelope. The motion was familiar, controlled, the same way she handled everything else in her life. "People are watching," she said quietly. "They were always watching," I replied. She looked up at that, really looked, not to correct, not to manage, just to see. There was no immediate response. At 9:27 p.m., 2 of my father's colleagues stood, exchanged brief words with my mother, and left without finishing their coffee. Others followed in smaller groups. Quiet exits, minimal eye contact, the kind of departure that signals distance without stating it. Reputation moves faster than facts. By 9:35, fewer than 20 guests remained. The room felt larger, less contained. Jonathan had said there would be follow-up. He was right. At 9:42 p.m., my phone vibrated once in my hand. A message, an unknown number. I opened it. "This is Officer Grant. We'll need a formal statement from you tomorrow morning. 10 a.m., Boston PD District 4. I typed a single word. Confirmed, sent. I didn't show it to anyone. At 9:50 p.m., my mother finally stood up from the table. Not abruptly. Just finished. She smoothed the front of her dress once, the same way she had done at the beginning of the night, before any of this had happened. "Emily," she said. I turned. Her voice was different now, less structured. "We'll need to understand exactly what you've filed," she said. "You'll receive the same documentation everyone else does," I replied. A pause. "You involve the police," she said. "Yes." Another pause. "You made this public." I shook my head once. "No," I said. "You did." She didn't argue. For the first time that night, she didn't adjust the framing of the conversation. She accepted the sentence as it was. Chloe stood slowly. "I'm going home," she said. No one stopped her. She picked up her bag, glanced once at my mother, then at me, and walked out without another word. My mother remained. We stood across from each other, the table between us, the documents still laid out in exact alignment. "I would have handled this differently," she said. "I know," I replied. That was the problem. At 10:03 p.m., only 9 guests were left in the room. The staff had begun clearing the remaining tables quietly, stacking plates, removing glassware in careful, efficient motions that avoided drawing attention. The night was ending, not the way it had been planned, but completely. My mother picked up the envelope again, held it for a second, then placed it back down. "Your father will call," she said. "Maybe," I replied. She nodded once, then she turned and walked toward the exit. No backward glance, no final instruction. Just departure. I stayed where I was for another minute. Then I reached forward and gathered the documents into a single stack, straightened the edges, aligned the corners, placed them back into my bag. At 10:07 p.m., I walked out of the ballroom. The hallway was quieter than before. The painting on the wall hadn't moved. The harbor scene still slightly off-center. I passed it without stopping. Outside, the air was colder. The parking lot had thinned. A few cars remained under the dim lights. Mine was still where I had left it. I unlocked it, placed my bag on the passenger seat, and sat down behind the wheel. For a moment, I didn't start the engine. I looked at my phone. No missed calls, no messages from my family, only the confirmation I had sent, 10 a.m. That was next. I started the car and drove away. It is quiet now. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, the kind that holds its shape. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, 3rd floor. The windows face a narrow street where people walk their dogs in the morning and double park in the evening. There's a radiator that clicks twice before it starts working. The kitchen light hums if it's left on too long. Everything here belongs to me. Every object has a reason. The folder sits in a drawer by the desk, closed, labeled, not hidden. The case moved the way Jonathan said it would. Slowly at first, then all at once. Statements. Records. Signatures reviewed by someone who didn't know our last name. The number stayed the same, 187,000. It didn't shift under pressure. Facts don't. My father was never arrested that night, but he was questioned. Then audited. Then investigated in a way that doesn't happen quietly, no matter how carefully someone tries to contain it. Carter Industrial Supply is still registered. It just doesn't hold the same weight it used to. Daniel called 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave one. He sent a message instead. We should talk. I read it once, didn't respond. Chloe texted a week after that. I didn't know. I believed her when she said it the first time. I believed her again on the screen. I still didn't answer. My mother waited the longest. 2 weeks, then a letter handwritten. 3 pages. No corrections. No crossed-out lines. She explained the structure of the accounts. The decisions that had been made for efficiency, the assumption that I wouldn't notice, the expectation that it wouldn't matter. She didn't apologize in the way people expect. She didn't use the word sorry. But she ended the letter with a sentence she had never said to me before. You were right to act. I folded it once. Placed it in the same drawer as the folder. Aligned. I didn't reply. There are things I lost. A house where everything had a place, even if I didn't. A family that understood each other. As long as nothing was questioned. A version of myself that waited to be acknowledged. There are things I gained control over my name. Clarity about what was done with it. Distance from people who only recognized me when it was useful. The room at the Westbrook Grand still exists. Other events fill it now. Different tables, different conversations, the same soft lighting, the same polished floors. No one there knows what happened on a Thursday night at 8:21 p.m. That's fine, they don't need to. I know the exact moment everything shifted, not when he spoke, not when I left. But when I decided not to go back in the same way, I still keep things aligned. Edges straight, corners matched, not because someone expects it, because I do. I don't raise my voice. I don't correct every mistake. But I don't let my name be used without consequence. That part is no longer negotiable. I was told I didn't belong at the table. They were right. I built my own.